Before we move on to our next panel, 30 Years After is proud to invite a representative and great friend in Washington, Henry Waxman, to share some remarks and to deliver with fellow Congressman Howard Berman a well-earned honor to one of our Shahs, Shervin Lalazari. Congressman Henry Waxman presents California's 30th Congressional District, which spans much of the West Side. During his more than 3 decades in Congress, Congressman Waxman has been a champion of the environment, landmark tobacco legislation, and a staunch supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Please join me in welcoming a great friend of our community, Congressman Henry Waxman and Howard Berman, who we will hear from on the next panel.
I'm very proud to be here. I have the great distinction and pride of representing the largest Iranian-American community in my congressional district, and I could not be more proud of this community. As you think through all the wonderful things you can do, I see an immigrant group that is already outstanding in everything that America has to offer to allow you to succeed to your fullest extent possible. I know you are searching within the community how to do better, and you're also searching to how to make sure that those who are back in Iran can have some of the human rights and dignity and freedom that we all experience in this country. Congressman Howard Berman and I are here, however, for a very specific mission, because we want to present a tribute to Deputy Sheriff Shervin Lalazari for the tremendous job he has done, and we're so proud of the work he has done. So if you'll come forward, and my colleague Howard Berman will make the presentation.
Well, thank you, Henry, and this is a page from the Congressional Record where tribute is paid in the Congressional Record on the floor of Congress to Sheriff Lalazari. This is a man who demonstrated, and you all know it already, but outstanding courage and bravery in capturing an infamous arsonist that wreaked havoc in the city of Los Angeles. I'm not going to go through the whole story because many of you know it, but what the interesting thing is, I just heard a discussion about what can we do. This is not his day job. He is a reserve officer who gives of himself to provide this service to the people of LA County, and in that capacity, giving of himself, he committed this tremendous act of bravery, and I'll bet a lot more. So on behalf of Henry and myself, we're very honored to present Deputy Sheriff Lalazari with this certificate.
Are we done? Oh, we're done. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do not leave. We will be transitioning to our next and final plenary session in just a couple of minutes. So please do not leave your seats.
To lead this important discussion is one of our community's true trailblazers, David NAHAI. David NAHAI is a partner in the law firm of Lewis Brisbois and is an expert in energy, environmental, water, and real estate issues. NAHAI is also the president of David NAHAI Consulting Services and has served as senior advisor to the Clinton Climate Initiative. Until October 2009, NAHAI served as the CEO and general manager of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the largest municipal utility in the United States, having been nominated by Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. A recipient of numerous awards and commendation, Mr. NAHAI also serves on the board of 30 Years After, Please join me in welcoming David NAHAI.
Thank you very much. Could we have the folks who are standing there please join us, come on back, sit down. This is, I think, the last panel of the day, and I dare say the best panel of the day. I think my wife Gina did a wonderful job with the last panel, but you get some idea of what life in our home is like. It's called 30 years after. We're actually, for Gina and I, this is 30 years after our marriage. We just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. I told her that she deserved a medal for the 30 years, and she absolutely agreed with me. So there we are. This is a truly stellar panel that's been assembled here for you with Congressman BERMAN, Supervisor YAROSLAVSKY, Assembly Member FEUER, and Council Member BOSSE. And it's my privilege to be the moderator. How we're going to proceed is as follows. I'll spend maybe 4 minutes just providing some context. Then I will introduce the panelists. They're each going to take maybe about 10 minutes to make their introductory remarks. Then what we'll do is perhaps have a round of moderator questions, but I'm hoping that that will leave ample time for us to have interaction with the audience as well. So the title of this panel is Why Politics Matters. But I think we should really rename it Why Politics Matters to You. Why politics matters to me as individuals. Because the very word politics comes from the word politikos, which is a Greek word, of course, and it means of or relating to the citizens. So at the very core of the idea of politics is individual involvement, in the involvement of the citizenry. And this is, of course, especially true in this democracy that we live in, where, unlike our forebears in Iran, we have the freedom to speak, to act, and to vote. And that, I think, also visits upon us an obligation to participate in the political life of this country. And you heard a few references to that with respect to the previous panel as well. And politics matters because the political process is the wellspring of all of the laws, regulations, and policies that affect our daily lives. They affect our businesses, they affect our kids, they affect our parents. And it was Bismarck who said that laws are like sausages, that they shouldn't be seen being made. This is a very famous quote of Otto von Bismarck. And I disagree with it thoroughly. Actually, we must see how it is that these laws are made. Not only must we see how they're made, we must do our utmost to participate in shaping them. Otherwise, we won't be able to complain when we're just left out at the end of it. And so if there are politicians that are coming to Los Angeles but are not consulting the Iranian Jewish community on matters of Iran, or indeed on matters of doing business in this country and other ventures, then that is because we haven't stepped forward to offer our expertise in these various arenas. So this is something that I think we absolutely must do. And I think that our community, let's remember, we're only, whatever it is now, 33 years in this country, but I think we're starting to step to the forefront, to become more and more involved in public service. And George Bernard Shaw said that liberty means responsibility. And then he said that is why most men dread it. Well, I think that we, the Iranian Jewish community of Los Angeles, shouldn't dread it. We should seize it. We should immerse ourselves in political life at every possible level. And let me say this from my own experience. For those of you that do, you will find that next to taking care of your family, there is no sweeter satisfaction than serving others. And you will also find that in the process, you will come to enrich your lives and to serve yourselves. So thank you for listening to me. And with that, I'm going to get my notes so that I can introduce our first panelist.
Yeah, okay.
Does this work?
You're supposed to have one, and I'm supposed to have two.
Okay. So our first speaker is, of course, Congressman Howard Berman. He requires no introduction whatsoever. He's about the closest thing to a legend as you can get in terms of American politics. He has represented the San Fernando Valley in the U.S. Congress since 1983. He is the ranking Democrat of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, having previously served as its chair. He was the lead author and primary proponent of the Iran sanctions legislation, which President Obama signed into law in 2010, and which are so effective these days in weakening the Iranian economy and the regime. 30 years after, applauds Congressman Berman for his principled leadership on this critical issue and his long-standing friendship for the Iranian Jewish community over the decades. His activism began on the UCLA campus with the Bruin Democrats in 1960, with his then fellow Bruin and now fellow Congressman, Henry Waxman. It's truly a privilege to welcome Congressman Howard Berman. Thank you for being here.
David, thank you very much. Your introduction, the notion that I didn't need an introduction may be true, but only since Thursday. We were talking, and we don't think it makes sense for each of us to talk for 10 minutes. We'd rather maybe talk for 5 minutes and then have more time for questions. And so I'm just going to make a few points. They may be a little disconnected, but they're points I get to make, I guess. The first is 30 years after. I listened to a significant portion of the previous panel, and I heard talk about Iranian American and Iranian Jewish American insularity. And the great thing for my point of view about 30 years after, and it's been true now for quite a while, is that at least for me as a member of Congress dealing with local issues of my district, of which there are a large number of Iranian Americans and Iranian Jewish Americans in that district, and on the Foreign Affairs Committee and dealing with Iran for obvious reasons, 30 years after, for me, is the first real memory of the institutionalization of direct, systematic, institutionalized outreach to me on a whole range of issues. There were individual meetings at different times and discussions, but frankly, to the extent there had been an institutionalized outreach to me from the Iranian American community, it mostly came from supporters of the MEK, not from the Iranian Jewish community, ironically. So 30 years after, changed that mode, and it has been it's just a tremendous group, and I congratulate you very much, and it is. I heard about the occupational and the charitable and the philanthropic and the civic and community involvement, but 30 years after was, for the whole political involvement, I think a very important step forward, and I congratulate all that you have accomplished. I feel very, very close to the organization. Secondly, I don't think this community, when you think about it, should question the importance of politics in our lives. How are you in America? How are you in Los Angeles? It was a political process that created our immigration process, our refugee process, allowed family members to petition for other family members, allowed employers to sponsor people who could have jobs when they came to this country, allowed people who had a well-founded fear of persecution to come to America. And through all these avenues, the Jewish much of the Jewish community of Iran was able to come here, settle here, and do what you have done so amazingly for 3 decades or more now, as a result of a political process. It may not have been designed and directed to you. It may have been in place before you took frequent use of it, but it was the result of a political process. And so much from the question of whether Iran gets to a nuclear weapon and what our politicians and our leaders do about it is the result of the political process, to the fact that if you drove around today, if you had been here 45, 50 years ago on a day like this, you couldn't have seen the mountains. The sky would not have been blue. A result of a political process resulted in the enactment of a whole series of legislative proposals that required certain conduct that they certainly haven't solved the problem, but they've done a tremendous job of reducing something as local, but as annoying, as unhealthy, and as discomforting as smog. I mean, so at a grand level, at a personal level, at a community level, these issues do get resolved through a political process. And unless you are truly sort of living in a cocoon, everything that happens is a result of the kinds of people that get elected and what they stand for. And I guess the final point I want to make is a little bit about Iran. We can get more into it in the specifics. But I heard a little discussion here, in fact, from 30 years after, how much Obama's done, how much Obama hasn't done. And I just thought it's not in my particular political interest to get deeply enmeshed in this debate right now for my own personal reasons, but I think I want to make 2 points on this. One, without the leadership of this administration, or let me put it differently, when this administration came into office, Iran was rising, countries all over the world and companies all over the world were dealing with Iran. Iran was getting stronger, and a sanction system that we had legislated back in the mid-1990s had never been utilized to affect third country or companies in third countries' behavior. As a result of a pretty diligent process, definitely pushed by the Congress, but implemented and in many cases exercised by the administration, Security Council sanctions were enacted. They were watered down. That's absolutely true. Russia was very difficult. But the basis in those Security Council UN sanctions, which the administration fought and fought for, became the basis for today the European Union refusing to buy a barrel of oil from Iran. It became the basis for international cooperation in stopping significant energy investments into Iran. It became the basis for screwing up their financial system so badly that their currency is plunging and they are in a very difficult situation. Now, none of that has yet stopped their nuclear program, and I can't stand here and tell you it will. But the other side of the coin, and what Senator Menendez said, is also true. There is much more we can do, and maybe if we get back into this in the context of this panel, I can go through it, but I can reel off 10 or 15 more sanctions that should be imposed that can help maximize the possibility that the current strategy in the United States and with the international community of stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program through increased and difficult sanctions that maximize the chances that the regime will so fear for its survival that it will look for a way out. And whether that will happen, I don't know. There's much more to do, and so in a way, both sides of that debate are correct.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman Berman. I would like, actually, when we get to questions, to explore that a little bit more as to what other steps can be taken in terms of sanctions and the effect that they might have on Iran's policies. The Honorable Zev Yaroslavsky, Supervisor Yaroslavsky, represents a vast swath of Los Angeles County, from the Pacific Ocean and the West Side up into the San Fernando Valley and Hollywood. Prior to his election to the Board of Supervisors in 1994, he served for nearly 20 years on the Los Angeles City Council. He has been a consistent fiscal leader, a strong environmental advocate, and he's championed the arts, the homeless, transportation projects. His public service also began at UCLA, where he spearheaded a high-profile protest against the oppressive treatment of Jews in the Soviet Union. He then served as executive director of the Southern California Council on Soviet Jewry. In August, he announced plans to retire after his term ends in 2014. Really a tremendous loss for all of us in Southern California. But I have every confidence that he will continue in public service in one way or another. He's really far too precious to us to just have him walk away from public involvements. The 30 years after board has asked me in particular to thank you for your service over all of these decades and for your friendship of the Iranian Jewish community ever since the first days that we came to this shore. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, David, and I'm honored to be on a panel with my co-panelists, these particular co-panelists. I'm not sure I know what the question I'm supposed to answer is, but I visited once with the chief rabbi of Romania about 20 years ago, and he said, "I don't know if you have any questions, but I have all the answers." So, so I figure this is my opportunity. Let me give you a couple of just thoughts based on my own personal experience. I look around this room. I spoke to 30 years after in a smaller meeting in Beverly Hills a few months ago. And when I looked at the younger people, younger than me, who were in that room, it took me back to my days at UCLA because I too am a son of immigrants. By the way, how many of you were born here, of the Iranian Jews who are here? How many of you were born here? Okay, and how many of you were born in Iran and immigrated here? Okay, so there's a good chunk of you who were born here, just like I was born here. My parents immigrated to this country from Tsarist Russia a long time ago. And when you grow up, as you know, and you grow up as an immigrant, or the son of immigrants, or the daughter of immigrants, at some point in your life, you start to get curious about what life was like for your parents in the old country. Some of us had relatives in the old country, so we wanted to know what the life conditions were for our relatives. I had 2 aunts and a cousin in the former Soviet Union. And eventually, you get to the point where you want to do, at least I wanted to do something about it. So I have 3 principles I wanted to share with you that are not necessarily the only principles, but they're principles that have guided me over my adult life. Number 1 is to be proud of who I am. I was part of a generation that followed the Holocaust. During the Holocaust in this country, being outspoken about your Jewishness, demanding action from the administration in those days about bombing the camps, bombing the rail lines to the camps, was very difficult. Jews were afraid to speak up for fear of being accused of harming the overall war effort. There was a considerable internal debate within the Jewish community that, in retrospect, is incomprehensible to those of us who grew up in the post-war era. So, to me, being proud of who I am, who my parents were, not going to sweep my Judaism under the rug. It's hard for me with a name like Zev Yaroslavsky to sweep it under the rug, even if I wanted to. But that was something that was a non-negotiable issue for me. So pride in who I was. Secondly, I made a couple of notes here. When I finally became old enough to write my own propaganda pamphlets and op-ed pieces and stuff in the Daily Bruin and elsewhere, it was an opportunity for me not just to be proud of myself, but also to educate others about who I was. And I don't mean me personally, but the community I represented was. And in the case of Soviet Jews, and that was my issue, from the time I was in high school to the time I got elected to the city council, I spent most of my time on Soviet Jewry activities, to the point where my graduate professor once called me into his office after I had been arrested for picketing a Soviet delegation here at the Shrine Auditorium, and my picture appeared as I was being led out of the auditorium with handcuffs on the front page of the LA Times. My professor the next day called me into his office and asked me, "Mr. Yaroslavsky, when are you going to devote at least as much time to your academic studies as you are to your extracurricular activities?" That was the day I decided I was leaving academia. He was right and I was right. But my life revolved around that issue, and my pride in who I was, the pride that I had in the fight to free Soviet Jews, was something I took to the streets, something I took to the halls of Congress, to the halls of the state legislature, to the halls of City Hall. We never missed an opportunity to try to educate politicians, newspaper editors, newspaper reporters, business people, whoever was within our line of sight. We never missed an opportunity to educate them about the issue we cared about. To take the pride and the educational piece and integrate it into engagement, and that's what this meeting is all about, this conference is all about, I think, in large measure today, is to take who you are, take what you believe in, take the issues you care about, and act on them, and demand that others act on them. There is no shame in this country, especially in this democracy, to petition your government to do things. Who would have thought in the 1970s that we could have gotten a bill passed in the United States Congress, forced the President of the United States, who was then Richard Nixon, to sign the bill, which he didn't want to sign because it was part of a bigger bill, he had to sign it, a bill that tied most favored nation status with the Soviet Union to the number of Jews who were going to be permitted to emigrate from the Soviet Union. The most significant piece of, in my opinion, of human rights legislation, immigration legislation, using our leverage to ever hit the halls of Congress. And over time, it had the impact of helping release tens of thousands of Soviet Jews even before the Berlin Wall came down. We did that because we had audacity. We were too stupid to know that you're not supposed to ask for these kinds of things, demand these kinds of things. Too naive. We saw a problem, we saw a solution, we saw a path forward, and we went to our congressmen and to our senators and started a movement. And this was before email, ladies and gentlemen. I think if we had had email in the 1970s, we could have accelerated the emigration of Soviet Jews by at least a decade. We did it all by mimeograph machines. Anybody here know what a mimeograph machine was? It's just a few. That is an opportunity that this country affords each and every one of us. So in closing my 5.5-minute remarks, let me just say the Iranian Jewish community has a lot on its plate, both locally and internationally. Don't be silent. I'm preaching to the converted here, I know, but don't be silent. Speak up, educate us, educate our not only our political representatives, but everyone, not only about your plight here, which is one thing, but about the country is looking for people who have some form of expertise about what's going on in Iran, other than politicians having press conferences about it. People who can speak in a human way. Those of you who have family there, who still have family there, or even distant family or friends, who can shed a light, shine a light on what's going on there in a human way. So to translate the plight, to translate the conditions in Iran into language that every man and woman listening to you can understand on a human level, not on a gross domestic product level, not on how the currency is doing, but how is life for your cousin? How has it changed? Because people react to personal stories more than they react to statistics. You have a singular opportunity. You're the only people in this community and in this country who can make that case in that way. I can't, Mike can't, Howard can't. You can. You have something to say. You have a way to educate us that will inform public policymakers in a way that you would want them to be informed and to take action that you'd want them to take. So I encourage you. This is an amazing turnout on a Sunday afternoon. They have this many hundreds of people from the Iranian Jewish community to sit in one room and talk about these things is remarkable. I congratulate you for it, and don't let it end here. When you leave this room, that's the important byproduct of what happened in this room, is what you do when you leave this room. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is the Honorable Mike FEUER. Assemblymember FEUER represents much of West Los Angeles, including Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, and parts of the San Fernando Valley in the California State Assembly, where he serves as the majority policy leader. Recently, Mike FEUER wrote the Iran Contracting Act, the first law in the nation under a new federal law authorizing states and local governments to divest from companies with investments that support Iran's energy sector. His law ensures that California's tax dollars do not go to companies whose investments support Iran's nuclear program or its exportation of terror. He has also authorized the Divest from Iran Act, the Divest from Iran Act, which brings new levels of transparency and accountability to California's public pension fund investments in Iran's energy sector. On behalf of 30 years after, Mr. FEUER, thank you for championing these important pieces of legislation. Prior to serving with the Assembly, Mike served on the Los Angeles City Council and served as CEO of Civic Legal Services. He's a candidate for the Office of City Attorney. I should have also mentioned that Congressman BERMAN is also currently running to renew his term in the United States Congress. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, David. Although the applause was for Howard's re-election bid, I'll take it anyway. It's okay.
It was for both of you.
Yes. I thought I was invited to an event for 30 years after, and I find myself in the second hour of the NAHAI Family Public Service Program. So it's good to be here. So I want to say just a word about 30 years after, because I was saying to a couple of you earlier, I remember when there were maybe 2 or 3 dozen people assembled in a room just a few years ago, and people have already paid tribute to Sam Yebri for his leadership. But what an extraordinary, what a remarkable ascension of an organization. Look at this. It's amazing. And to me, it is less a testament to what has been accomplished than a testament to what can yet be accomplished. Because I'm expecting 30 years after to grow exponentially beyond this. So in answering the question is why do politics matter? And I think the question might be especially profound for 30 years after members when it's framed as, why do politics matter as opposed to other forms of civic engagement? Right? Because so many of you have been involved yourselves, your families, with business or with philanthropy. Why should politics interest you? Why should you focus on what those of us up here do for a living? And I want to try to answer that in a couple different ways. Howard began to answer the question in one way that I think everybody here could identify with, and that is very specific legislation that wouldn't have existed but for involvement. For example, that federal law that authorized California to act, Howard Berman led that effort. That's why that law was there, enabling California to take this action. And by the way, my colleague Bob Blumenfield and I worked on those bills together as a team. When I was running BEVERLY Legal Services, Zev was a city council member. And I want to talk about this through the lens of my own experience. I loved running BEVERLY. Just so you know, the work of BEVERLY is the people in our area, in our region, who are most in need. A grandmother who's being abused in a nursing home. Some family living in slum housing. A parent who's about to lose their health care. These are the clients of BEVERLY, and they have no money, and they're confronting the most difficult problem that they've ever faced, and they need a lawyer. When I ran BEVERLY, 50,000 people came to us during those 8 years, and we got great results almost every time. That mattered a lot. But as I was running BEVERLY, we were also involved in advocating for broader change. Sometimes our cases would involve many people, but often, more frequently, they'd involve a single individual. And again, especially when advocating to change the law at the city, state, or federal levels, I found myself on the urging side of that equation. And inspired by people like Howard, particularly inspired by Zev, whose city council seat I ran for once Zev ascended to the Board of Supervisors. It was one thing to be advocating for something to change. It was another thing to be in a position to actually make the change. But in either case, whether one was advocating for it or running for office and being in office, I felt there was something special, very unique, about awakening in the morning and only focusing on how to make the world better. As David said, one's family and making the world better in very concrete ways. And I thought as I was growing up about what kind of career I wanted to embark on. Would it be in business, for example? Would it be in philanthropy alone? And it seemed to me as though there was something unique about politics that brings stakeholders from across a wide spectrum together. And yes, there are fights, but the question is, what's going to come of the fights? What is the result? And to me, politics matter the most because of the results one can achieve. And I want to just close very brief opening remarks with this. Especially in our national political dialogue right now, whether it be in Congress or on TV or the radio, we are seeing a premium placed on identifying ways that one can be divided from somebody else. What's wrong with that person's view? And not so much focus on listening carefully to try to determine what the best is of someone else's perspective might be, and to synthesize that with one's own view or the views of others. Because I think the most important thing about politics is not the yelling at each other. The most important thing is finding enough common ground to advance the ball forward, whether it be on American policy or international policy vis-a-vis Iran, or whether it's making sure that some senior citizen has food. The question is, how can we come together to fix it, to solve problems? And I think, for my own money, that even though it's messy and frustrating and complicated and there are days when things don't work out very well, the most effective way I have found to solve problems is to engage in the political process. I want to finish my last sentence with this. You know, I mentioned at the outset that this is a really profound question, I think, for 30 years after members, because you are so busy in your private lives, and there are decisions to be made about how to allocate your precious time. I hope that you will choose to engage, especially politically, because I think that that unique form of civic engagement can be the most effective, even in a day like today when people around the country question the efficacy of government. Now is the time. Zev said it. It's the time to act. It's funny because, Howard on this panel is the dean of the group of us, and of at least 3 of us who've served for a long time, and Lily is the newest member of the political circle here. It's a special thing for me to have the privilege to serve on a panel with these guys, because they have paved the way, and I hope that as we go on, you ask them for their wisdom on this stuff, because of all the people who are in public office, there are very few people with the records that these two guys have. Anyway, I want to tell you how much I appreciate being here, and David, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to remind the audience to write your questions, please, on the pads that you have, and then somebody will be around to pick them up, and no doubt to censor them so that only good questions will be presented to the panel. So please do that. All right, last but by no means least, it's my privilege to introduce the Honorable Lili BOSSE. Lili BOSSE was elected to the Beverly Hills Council in 2011. She served on the Beverly Hills Planning Commission from 2007 through 2011 as a member and as the chair. From 1997 through 2002, she served as a member and chair of the Traffic and Parking Commission. She's also served as president of the Beverly Hills Education Foundation. The only child of Holocaust survivors, Lili has served as chair of the Women's Venture Fund and chair of the Lion of Judah Division of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. We thank Lili for her support of 30 Years After, and we'll talk a couple of seconds more while that microphone makes its way to her. Please, let's hear from Lili BOSSE.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor of sitting up here with such incredible leaders, and I definitely am the youngest in the group on many levels. I've only been in political office now for less than 2 years, but I feel that this has been a journey that has been throughout my entire life. When I ran for office, what I put in all of my election materials, and whenever I would meet somebody, I would tell everybody that I was an only child of Holocaust survivors. And there were people that were talking either behind my back or to my face. They would say to me, "Why does that matter? Why does it matter? Why are you even mentioning that you're an only child of Holocaust survivors?" And what I said to them, and what I feel very strongly, is it really defined me, and it really made me go on the path that I am on now, which is when Zev was talking about his family history. I saw so much of myself as to what made me go on this path in the first place. To grow up and have your ancestry pretty much be lost because of their religion, because of their beliefs, made me feel that I wanted to take a path that would make sure that that would never happen again. And, you know, this past summer, I went back to Poland and I went back to Auschwitz. I think it turned maybe turning 50 and also running for office, to give myself the courage to go back and face my history. And while I was in Auschwitz, I had a hard time to even breathe, actually. It was a moment in time that I think really shaped me. And what I walked away with was the fact that no matter what was happening to everybody in the concentration camps, no matter how they were being broken, they still had a strong will to survive, and they still had a strong will to go on. And when I left there, I felt this is exactly what everybody here in this room is trying to do, and everybody here on the stage believes in, is to make a difference and to keep going and to keep believing in what is good and what is right. And that, to me, is why politics matter. And when I was running for office, I had to gather some photos of the years of experience that I had. And I had grown up in Beverly Hills. I had gone to the Beverly Hills schools. And as many people who start in city council and then move forward, it's because it's something that you believe in. It's the community that you love. And when I was looking at the pictures and I saw that I was involved in the schools and I saw that I was involved with the police department and involved with the city, it's like what Steve Jobs said, you can connect the dots looking backwards. And I looked at all the dots of my life and I saw that it all made sense. And even when I went to USC and I was joining a sorority, and they took me in the back and they said to me, "You should join this house because there are no Jews here." And I remember looking at them and realizing they didn't know that I was Jewish. And I said, well, I am Jewish, so I guess this is not the house for me. And I remember when I was walking through the city, my favorite part of running for office was knocking on doors and meeting the community and people who lived in beautiful homes who seemed, when I would look down at, you know, the names, and they were doctors or they were lawyers, and they seemed like they would have had the education. When I would come to the door and some people would say, you need to do something about the Iranian community here in Beverly Hills. And I looked at them and I said, what year are you in? I mean, you've have the education, and what really surprised me was that as much as we've come forward, there's still those that need to come further along. And that to me is why politics matters and why it's important that we all get involved in whatever our passion is. For me, as I said, being an only child, the community of Beverly Hills has been an extended family to me. And it's a small family to me. So just as starting with getting involved with the schools and then ultimately getting involved with commissions and then now being on the city council, I feel that I have given what my past history, what my ancestry had lost, I'm giving them a voice. So I feel very, very blessed to be here, and blessed because I know that everybody here is doing the same for their families. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. So I understand that questions on pads are being gathered, but in the meantime, I've got a couple of questions on my own, so I'll exercise my prerogative to do that. Congressman Berman, let me start with you. You know, we see the sanctions working. We see the economy getting weaker in Iran. We see oil exports plummet. And that places pressure on the regime, and we've seen recently protests on the part of the Iranian public, and that's all very encouraging. I don't personally have any family in Iran. I left Iran when I was 10 years old, but many people in this room do. And they see that the effects of the sanctions has a very detrimental impact on the people of Iran. And in Iran especially, one needs to really divorce the regime from the people. The people, as I remember them, are the most hospitable, very kind people. Some of them have got a problem with religious diversity, unfortunately, but apart from that. So how do you, in terms of the additional steps that you spoke about, to hopefully get us to a place where we can arrest the nuclear program, but yet spare the people the full impact of these very painful sanctions? How do you see that unfolding?
This strategy, there's no way for this strategy to work without having negative and serious implications on the people of Iran. And you are absolutely right. To the extent one can get information about what the publics think in that part of the world, the overwhelming evidence is that the Iranian people are more pro-West, more pro-America, more pro sort of diversity, and like the United States better than the people, many of the people in other countries in the Middle East. In fact, I have a theory. The closer we were to the autocratic, repressive government in the Middle East, the more the people of that country hate us. The closer we were, the more estranged and hostile we were to the regime in an authoritarian and repressive government, the more the people like us. And that's why Iran's on that side. But I don't know. But let me give you a couple of ideas in terms of what we should be doing. We know the regime and the elites in the regime have huge amounts of cash in other countries. We can track down those hidden assets. We should be tracking down those hidden assets. We should be doing everything we can to pressure the governments to allow us to seize those assets that will hit the elites, the decision makers, and because they're working all the time to insulate themselves from the personal discomfort of what's going on there, and we have to strike at that. But I would be misleading you, since remember the logic of this. For me, the regime will not change its mind because the people of Iran are suffering. They will only change their mind when they think their own survival is at risk. That is the only thing that will change their mind. And everything we're doing is designed to create an environment where they, and somehow, are going to have to reverse course in order to survive. To me, it's all this. It's not out of, oh my gosh, our people can't get enough refined gasoline, and the merchants can't get enough goods, and oh, their currency is weak. They don't care about the people of Iran. They care about their survival, and that is the one place where they are exceedingly rational. It is about their survival, and so I don't know how to design this scheme to insulate the people, except to hope that the pressure can become so great that the time can be so short that they have to go through this, and it has to be short because of the nuclear clock, that in the end they will say, we suffered a hell of a lot, but we achieved the goal.
Let me, Congressman Berman, let me also direct this question from the audience to you. I think to a large extent you've just answered it, but I think it's worth posing the question anyway. The question is, do you think that the administration has a good grasp and understanding of the regime in Iran? And do you think that it has properly understood the ruthlessness and the cruelty with which the Ayatollahs go about dealing with the people of Iran?
One could wonder about that when they listened to the initial attempt by the administration to offer the hand, to come and let's talk, let's discuss every issues. You have to talk to your enemies. Let's come together. They spent 8 or 9 months pushing that alternative. Now the question is, did they think that would really happen? Or did they think that it was necessary for them to go through that process to create the international coalition that would stop investing in Iran's energy sector, stop selling refined petroleum products, and ultimately cut off petroleum exports? I think they were tough-minded enough not to believe that this regime was ever going to accept their offer, but they had to create an atmosphere in order to get international support for the sanctions. We can't do it by ourselves. We've been sanctioning Iran since 1979, with a brief exception for pistachios, carpets, and caviar. But basically, we've been sanctioning them. We have to get other countries and companies in other countries to stop doing these things, and I think they were... Dennis Ross is not a fool. He was the architect of this strategy. I think you heard from him this morning. He knew what that regime is like. He knew, he understood the brutality of it. Again, I go back to the point, only fear of their survival will get them to move. There's nothing in the notion of honor or dignity or their people that's going to change their course.
Thank you very much. So, moving ahead, Supervisor Yaroslavsky, I have a note here lamenting your decision not to run for mayor and asking whether you would like to discuss that. So the question was posed, so I'm passing it on to you. If you want to say, no, I don't want to talk about it, I think that's a good answer.
No, I don't want to talk about it because it's not important, but since you asked, I'll answer it out of courtesy. I've been an elected official now for for over 37 years, 37 and a half years. as a local elected official. In Congress, seniority matters. At the local level, it gets tiring. And when I finish my term in a little over 2 years, I will have served for 39 and a half years. There are other things I want to do with my life, and I want to get on with doing those things while I still am young enough and vigorous enough and healthy enough to do them. I don't want to spend another decade at what will be a very difficult job, I would argue an almost impossible job, in an environment where the mayor does not have sufficient power and authority to actually make change, because those of you who follow city government should be aware that the city is a strong city council, weak mayor form of government, even after charter reform of a few years ago. So my idea of the golden years of my life is not to kill myself over something that I've done for 40 years. I'm very satisfied with my record. I still have a lot of work to do in the next 2 years. And then I want to do some other stuff. I want to write, I want to teach, I want to travel, I want to do some stuff that I've done overseas, and I want to be free to do those things without being in a 24/7 environment, which all of us who are in government recognize is the price we pay for doing what we love to do. I've loved every minute of my elected official career, but I'm also smart enough to know that starting in December of 2014, I'm not sure I'm going to love it as much. So, and I have a new granddaughter, which is a very important factor. So, and she told me she'd rather have me around than dealing with all these visits. So that's what it is. Really, I've done it enough. It's long enough for me, and I'll still be in town. I'm still going to be involved. I'll use my bully pulpit, whatever's left of it. I care a lot about the city. I've lived here all my life, and I'm going to live here the rest of my life. But I don't have to be an elected politician for the rest of my life, because if I do it, I won't live very long. Thanks for the question.
I'm told we've got just about 10 minutes left. So next question for Assembly Member FEUER. You talked about polarization, which has happened. Actually, this whole idea of the left wing and the right wing comes to us courtesy of the French Revolution, where in the National Assembly, those people who were for the aristocracy and the monarchy and the church would sit on the right, and those people who had a more egalitarian, set of principles would sit on the left. So, but as you look at left and right now, it's as if we're being transported back to the days of the French Revolution. So, in your capacity as city attorney, though, are you going to be able to really do anything about that, about the polarization that we see? And the other question that I have for you real quick is, one of the audience members has asked, if there is one thing that you would recommend an audience member do to get more politically involved, what would that one thing be? So if you could cover that very quickly, because I've got a question for Council Member BOSSE as well.
Very good. So let me answer the latter question first. I think right now in the political season we're in, culminating in a November election, but another one in March, I think for people who are intrigued by politics but not yet deeply involved in it, find someone in whom you believe and get involved in one of these campaigns. I think that there's something special about what happens to you when you're affiliated with a cause. And to me, politics is about the cause. So that would be my recommendation. Now, as to the first part of your question, the city attorney actually is uniquely situated in the city to play the role of bringing people together to solve problems. I mentioned earlier, the city attorney is like the problem solver in chief for the city of Los Angeles, and it's a nonpartisan role. Republicans and Democrats alike will vote for the next city attorney, and I hope support me. So in that role, how can one be a source of problem-solving skills? Well, again, I think, and I used to teach at UCLA, the Public Affairs School, students who aspire to be in public service. And I'd say to them, in politics, speaking skills are vastly overvalued, and listening skills are not valued nearly enough. That's particularly true in the role of, say, a city attorney, who has to be listening to the spectrum of opinion around a key issue and trying to find a way to solve it. Some of the issues I would be confronting as city attorney have to do with how to tackle the homelessness issue in Los Angeles, how to deal with gangs and gun violence, how to make sure our environment is the kind of environment we want, and how to tackle slum housing. These are the kinds of issues that don't admit of rigidly partisan answers. They require somebody who has the skills to bring people who don't necessarily agree with each other together and synthesize the best of their views. So I think in this problem solver in chief role for the city, there's a real opportunity to exemplify what it means to look past artificial differences and rivet ourselves on what it takes to get the job done.
Thank you very much. A question for you, Council Member Bosse, and then there's a general question that I've been told to ask all of the panelists. It may take us a couple of minutes over, but I'm sure that's okay. The question for you concerns, since you are a Beverly Hills Council member, and since there is such a large Iranian Jewish community in Beverly Hills and in the school system, do you still see the old stereotypes continuing? Or do you think that we've made real progress in breaking through them and to a larger kind of acceptance of this community by the larger Beverly Hills community?
Well, first, David, I would love for you to tell me what you mean by the old stereotypes.
Well, okay, I will. You know, I think we've come a long way, but we did arrive here, you know, in the shadow of the hostage crisis. You know, a rather traumatized, I think, community. I think it's taken us time to establish ourselves, to take care of our families, to make our businesses grow. I think with that has come a certain level of insularity. I think we face the age-old problem that I think immigrants face, which Supervisor YAROSLAVSKY alluded to, which is how do you maintain your identity and at the same time assimilate into the larger society. And this is really, I think, what we're seeing here with the 30 years after movement. And what is remarkable about what's been accomplished here is that here we have a whole bunch of people that weren't even born in Iran, that were born in the United States of America, and still, though, feel this need to bond with their culture, with their heritage, with their people. And I think in bringing up our kids, we face that kind of every day. You know, how do you impress on your child the fact that he or she is an American, but at the same time comes from a history that's 2,500 years old and with this very rich heritage that we have. I think the result of that has been in the past a certain amount of distrust from both. From Iranian Jews to perhaps the wider community, not wanting their kids to marry even Ashkenazis and stuff like that. And I get letters from some rabbis that would say that. And I think there's also been distrust on the other side. I'm hoping, though, that, and I think Beverly Hills is actually the epicenter of it. And so I think there have been some misunderstandings, some stereotypes in the past. But I'm hoping that we're seeing those dissipate. And I'm wondering whether, as a city council member, first, does anything of what I've said make sense?
It does, okay. But I can also speak because, I am also a child of immigrants myself. So even though I was born in the United States, my parents spoke with accents. I was the one that when there would be a letter that was written to school, I had better English than they did. So I think I have my own sense of understanding and empathy for the immigrant plight coming to the United States. I think in Beverly Hills specifically, though, I do think that the differences have narrowed. We had a mayor, Jimmy Delshad, who was an Iranian Jew, who I think also brought forth a lot of education to our community. We have a tremendous amount of Iranian Jews that serve on our commissions. I think there were times in our city when we've had some issues. We just went through something called a noise ordinance because there were some cultural issues with how long parties should last in our city and such, and trying to kind of bridge the education in our community between culture, between neighbors' understanding, between tolerance. We formed a Human Relations Commission, which has people on our commission from different religions, different cultures, as a way for us to understand each other. So I can tell you from my perspective, having gone to Beverly High and graduating in '79, which is when a lot of the Iranian culture was coming to the Beverly Hills schools, I do think that the bridge has definitely come further together. And as a matter of fact, I keep begging my son that hopefully he will find a nice Jewish Iranian girl to marry so I can become part of the family. So if you know of any, please let me know.
They are jewels indeed. So do I have time for one? Okay, last question, and this is for everybody. And I think, I would know how to answer this question for myself, but the question is, at what moment, if there indeed was a moment, that kind of moment of epiphany almost, did you know that you were going to dedicate yourself to public service? And did you know that you were going to enter politics? Was there ever a single moment that you can identify that occurred? Who'll go first?
I'll be happy to go first because it's a very simple answer. It was during the John Kennedy for President campaign. I was all of 11 or 12 years old, and but a very sophisticated 11-year-old. And there were two things that happened. One is that in September, October of 1960, during the campaign for president, Eleanor Roosevelt came to the Fairfax Theater on Beverly and Fairfax to speak on behalf of JFK. And I remember like it was yesterday that the marquee on top of the theater, all day, all it said was, Mrs. FDR tonight. Like she was performing. I got in, I snuck into the back of the theater and stood backstage. When she came out after her speech, she shook my hand, and it was an important moment. It was an electric moment for me. A few weeks later, Kennedy himself came to the Shrine Auditorium to speak. I conned my dad into taking me down there, 10,000 people outside. Because I was such a little kid, everybody let me get to the front of the crowd as he walked outside towards the auditorium, and I got as close to JFK as I am to Howard. And that was an electric moment. That got me interested in politics, and I say politics with a lowercase p, issues, debates. And my home, my father's home, my parents' home, my mother had passed away, our kitchen table, which was also our dining room table since we had no dining room, was a debating table. We debated every issue, whether it was Middle East or Vietnam War or this, that, and the other thing. But it all started in the JFK campaign in a very 11-year-old sort of way. But then as I became a high school student and I got involved in the Soviet Jewry issues, human rights issues, in college, the anti-war movement, as well as my Soviet Jewry activity. And then there was never a moment where I said, I want to be an elected official. I always wanted to be involved in public policy in some way, a staffer to a congressman or something like that. But then lightning struck. I ran in 1975 in a race I wasn't supposed to win, and it changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I'm happy for it. But yeah, it's one last thing. I see the warning sign. You should know this about my household. My parents were very political. My father founded the Hebrew Teachers Union in Los Angeles. They were both labor Zionists from the old country. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a delegate to several of the first Zionist congresses in Europe at the turn of the century. So debate and issues of social justice and Jewish survival were it's in my DNA. I was brought up with it in my home. And so that all translated into this.
Thank you. Congressman Berman.
Opposite of Zev. Parents nervous and scared of involvement in politics. Immigrant, father, fearful of you sign a petition, they'll come for you. I mean, very nervous. With one exception, a deep, deep commitment to Zionism. My first and only political event for many years that I remember was being taken in 1948 to a place called Gilmore Stadium that no one in this room will remember, but it was at CBS Television City for the Israeli Independence Day. What got me interested in the issues and international events was a wonderful high school teacher that just excited me about the whole thing. And what got me interested in actually, I mean, I had been the lawyer for the Hebrew Teachers Union, but what got me interested in ultimately in being a legislator was a fellowship, an internship in Sacramento for 10 months where I could see that you could make incremental changes that affected people's life. You weren't going to end poverty, you weren't going to solve all the problems, but you could make some things better by pushing legislation and doing so adroitly and in a way that helped to build the majorities, and that appealed to me. And when I had the opportunity, I did it.
Great.
So I'm going to condense a kind of interesting story into just a moment. My dad, it's interesting how much family matters in this conversation. My father was a prisoner of war in a Nazi prisoner of war camp during World War II. And when I was a kid, I remember I was a high school student, I must have been 17 years old or so, playing catch with him after school one day, or on a Saturday, I can't remember which, and talking about why he chose his job, which was to be an educator. My father was a teacher and then a school principal. The nub of the story is being a Jewish prisoner of war in Stalag 17 was a horrible thing. And as the Nazis were running from the oncoming Russian army at the end of the war and picking up the camp, my father could hardly walk and almost, well, I don't know if he almost died, but came close to it as they were walking across the entire country of Austria in the snow, and my father could hardly walk and dragged himself across that whole country. And my dad was telling me this and saying, I wasn't supposed to survive that experience. And because I did, I emerged committed to do the most important work in the world. And for my dad, that work was the training of young children. So he became a teacher and then a principal because he'd seen war, he'd been exposed to the Holocaust. That was a defining moment. Not necessarily to run for elective office, but it was a defining moment in terms of what matters in one's life. My father still volunteers at age almost 90, 89 years old in LA schools. But the notion that if I didn't find that most important thing, I would somehow be letting myself down because I would miss an opportunity to do what really matters. And for my dad, it wasn't making a lot of money. It was expressing himself in the way he did. And I just want to conclude with one sentence to this effect. In this room, there are people who are very engaged, I think. But and when it comes to politics, I want to tell you, there is a real important role for inspiring people. You who are involved can inspire other people. We can inspire people about why it matters to be involved and exemplify why it matters in what we do. And I hope today, if nothing else, people leave feeling a little more inspired and compelled to engage somebody else. Because in this moment, when people are pretty cynical about politics, if we don't inspire the best in people, we're not going to make it. And if we do, the potential is almost unlimited. So that's how I'd respond.
And I'll do this very quickly. For me, I had absolutely no idea that I would ever run for office. And as a matter of fact, in the years that I had been involved in different parts of the city, in the schools, people would mention it to me, and I would say, no way, I would never do that. So what I find interesting is as I said earlier, it's when I looked back at my life and I looked at how I really did spend the last 20 years, I realized that I was actually doing what got me to where I am today. I just spent my time doing what my heart was telling me to do and what I was passionate about. And really, I think, as I said earlier, the fact that my parents were immigrants and they didn't speak English well, I felt a sense of having to kind of keep the generation going and to keep the fact that my family history that died in the Holocaust, I had to find a way to keep them alive. And it's, for me, the most fulfilling times that I've ever had in my life. And I think, to me, the bottom line is just to follow your heart. And when you follow your heart, you know that you're doing the right thing.
All right. Thank you very, very much. Okay, was this an excellent panel or what? Come on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all of our panelists. We especially want to thank and acknowledge Congressman Berman, our most tireless and effective proponent of Iran sanctions in Washington. Thank you, Congressman Berman. Thank you very much. Before our break for our organizational fair and cocktail section, featuring nearly 30 sponsoring Jewish organizations, 30 years after is proud to call to stage a very special guest to deliver brief remarks, Dr. Ari Babaknia. Dr. Ari Babaknia is the internationally acclaimed author of monumental 4-volume books written on the Holocaust, the first of its kind in Persian language. After 15 years of research, Dr. Babaknia released the book as a means to educate 120 million Persian speakers around the world, especially those still living in the Islamic Republic of Iran, about the Holocaust so as to prevent future atrocities from ever taking place again. A physician who completed his medical education in Iran, he moved to the U.S. in 1974 to continue his education in women's medical and infertility, medical health. He's a source of pride to our community, and we commend him in the highest terms for his accomplishment and for providing such a crucial and courageous service to millions of people around the world who would otherwise never know about the devastating effects of state-sanctioned anti-Semitism. Never again. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ari Babaknia. Thank you.
15 years ago, when I began my research as a student of Holocaust, I knew something that all of us knew about the Holocaust, that Nazis had an evil intent, criminal intent to kill the Jews. We all knew, and I knew, that the Jews of Europe were there. My question was, where was the world? To what extent and when the world leaders, President Roosevelt, Churchill, they knew about the Holocaust. And the most devastating question was, why and how in the world they allowed it to happen. I learned that the Jews of Europe were ground to dust between the two millstones of Nazis' criminal intent and the callous world leaders, allied leaders' indifference. I learned
that when we see injustice, silence is not an option. Silence is always in favor of oppressors. I learned that what we don't say counts. After 15 years of research in Holocaust, and for those who spent 50 years, they all say the same thing. There is one question about the Holocaust we cannot answer, and that question is why? What is in human nature an institution that makes events like Holocaust to happen? You cannot, simply you cannot kill 1 million children, innocent children, because of the faith of their parents and think that the world can go on as it did before. And that's why I wrote these books. There are 4 books in Farsi, and I think I urge all of you to urge your parents to read it, because we don't know about the Holocaust. I know a lot of you, 90% of you do not speak or write, at least read Farsi, but your parents do. We are obligated to know about the Holocaust and let it not to be forgotten. Thank you. Forgetting the Holocaust, and I want you to take this message home. Forgetting the Holocaust is the true death of the victims. This is exactly what the Nazis want. And the only way to remember it is to read about it and teach it. Thank you.